The gunfire stopped at exactly 0347 hours. That's when Sergeant Marcus Webb knew something was terribly wrong. In 6 years of combat deployments across 3 continents, he'd learned that silence in a firefight meant one of 2 things. Either the enemy was dead, or they were planning something worse. His team was pinned down in what remained of a compound outside Kandahar. 3 clicks from any support, with a wounded translator bleeding out on the floor, and a mission that had gone sideways the moment they'd breached the door. The intelligence had promised a routine extraction. Extract 1 high-value informant, get out clean, home before sunrise. But intelligence, Marcus had learned long ago, was often just an educated guess wrapped in confidence. The informant they'd come for was already dead when they arrived. Executed, recently. The blood was still warm, and the 15 men who'd been waiting in ambush had made it clear this was never about extraction. This was about elimination. His team's elimination. Now, huddled behind a crumbling wall with his radio operator unconscious, his squad leader missing 3 fingers from a grenade blast, and ammunition running critically low, Marcus faced a choice that wasn't in any manual, wasn't covered in any training scenario, and would probably end his career if he survived long enough to face the consequences. The compound held more than just his team. In the lower levels, they'd discovered something during their desperate search for cover. 12 civilians, women and children from the local village, taken as human shields, locked in a basement that was now filling with smoke from fires the ambush had started. Protocol said call for extraction, hold position, wait for quick reaction force. But QRF was 20 minutes out, and the building would be an inferno in 10. Protocol also said, never compromise mission security, never reveal tactical positions, never break radio silence except for emergency traffic. Marcus was about to break all 3 and throw in a few more violations for good measure. He crawled to where his youngest soldier, Private Danny Torres, was performing field dressings on the translator with shaking hands. The kid was 19 on his first deployment, and had frozen during initial contact, until Marcus had physically dragged him to cover. Now Danny worked with focused determination, the kind that comes from pure survival instinct overriding fear. Torres, listen to me. Marcus kept his voice level, commander calm despite the chaos. I need you to do something that's going to sound insane. Danny didn't look up from the pressure bandage he was tying. More insane than being trapped in a burning building surrounded by 30 hostiles. Sergeant, fair point. Marcus almost smiled. We've got civilians in the basement, locked in. We get them out or they die. But our squad can't hold position, rescue civilians, and survive extraction. Not with our numbers and ammunition. So what's the insane part? Marcus pulled out his personal cell phone. A violation of operational security so severe, it could result in court-martial. I'm calling someone who isn't military, someone who's not on any approved contact list, someone who can get those civilians out while we hold the line. Danny's hands stopped moving. Sergeant, unauthorized communication from a tactical position is the least of my problems right now, Private. Marcus was already dialing a number he'd memorized, but never thought he'd use. A number given to him by a former Special Forces operator, who'd gone private contractor, who'd whispered it to Marcus one night in a bar in Kabul with the words, if you ever need something done that can't be done officially, call this. Once, ever, the line rang twice. A voice answered, Russian accent thick and unmistakable. Who is this? A friend of Volkov's. I need immediate assistance. I can pay. Pause. Where? Marcus rattled off coordinates. 12 civilians, basement level, hostile compound, were combat effective for maybe 15 more minutes. After that, everyone dies. Price is 50,000 American. Done. 8 minutes. The line went dead. Danny stared at him. Did you just hire a Russian mercenary on a personal phone call from an active combat zone? Technically, he's Ukrainian, and technically, you didn't see that. Sergeant, they'll end you for this. Only if we survive long enough for them to find out. The next 8 minutes were the longest of Marcus's life. His team held their positions as the compound continued to burn, as ammunition dwindled to single magazines, as the wounded translator's breathing became increasingly labored. His squad leader, Staff Sergeant Chen, crawled over with his mangled hand wrapped in bloody gauze. "Talk to me, Webb. What's our play?" Marcus met his eyes. "Cavalry's coming. Unofficial cavalry." Chen processed that for exactly 2 seconds. "How unofficial are we talking? The kind that'll get me a court-martial? The kind that'll get us home?" "That too." Chen nodded once. "Then I didn't see anything. Didn't hear anything. Don't know anything. We clear?" "Crystal." The sound came first, not helicopters, which would have announced themselves from miles away, not ground vehicles, which couldn't have reached them through the hostile-controlled streets, but motorcycles, 6 of them, screaming through the night like mechanical banshees, each carrying 2 riders. They hit the compound's weak point, a partially collapsed wall on the eastern side, and they hit it hard. Suppressing fire erupted with a volume that suggested very illegal automatic weapons. The ambush force, caught between Marcus's team and the new arrivals, made the fatal mistake of splitting their attention. 3 minutes later, it was over. The motorcycle team had breached the basement, loaded civilians onto bikes like they were running some kind of apocalyptic taxi service, and were already extracting before Marcus's radio operator regained consciousness. The Ukrainian contractor appeared at Marcus's position, face covered, gear black and unmarked. "Civilians safe. Your wounded need medevac. QRF 2 minutes out." "How do you know?" "We monitor your frequencies. Part of the service." He handed Marcus a burner phone. "Never speak of this. Payment instructions on the phone. You have 72 hours. I don't have $50,000. The contractor tilted his head. "Then you'll find it, or you'll have larger problems than a court-martial." "Clock is ticking, Sergeant." He vanished into the night with his team, leaving Marcus with a compound full of dead hostiles, a basement full of freed civilians who would tell stories about motorcycle-riding angels, and a command structure that would have questions he couldn't answer. The QRF arrived to find Marcus's team securing the perimeter, the translator stabilized, and 12 grateful villagers who couldn't explain how they'd escaped. Staff Sergeant Chen's report was a masterpiece of creative omission. Contact with superior force, sustained firefight, enemy broke and scattered, civilians escaped in the confusion. Sergeant Webb demonstrated exceptional leadership under fire. What the report didn't mention: unauthorized communication, foreign contractors, or the fact that Marcus had just made a deal that would haunt him for months to come. Back at base, after debriefs and medical checks, Marcus sat alone in his quarters, staring at the burner phone. 72 hours to produce $50,000 he didn't have, for a service he couldn't acknowledge, to save civilians who officially saved themselves. He could confess, take the court-martial, end his career with honor mostly intact, let the contractors face whatever consequences came from non-payment. But those 12 civilians would be dead, his team would be dead, and honor, Marcus had learned, was a luxury afforded to people who'd never had to choose between the right decision and the right regulation. His door opened without knocking. Chen walked in, dropped a duffel bag on Marcus's bunk, and walked out without a word. Marcus unzipped it. Cash, lots of cash. He didn't count it, but it looked close to 50,000. 5 minutes later, Torres appeared, handed Marcus an envelope. Inside, a check for $10,000, certified, drawn on an account Torres couldn't possibly have. The kid shrugged at Marcus's questioning look. My grandfather, Special Forces, Vietnam. When I told him I met a sergeant worth following, he said, keep this for when that sergeant needs it. I guess today's that day. Before dawn, Marcus had received similar contributions from every member of his team. Some cash, some checks, some wire transfer instructions. Nobody asked questions. Nobody wanted explanations. They'd all been in that compound. They'd all counted the ammunition. They'd all done the math on survival versus protocol. By hour 68, Marcus had the full amount. He followed the burner phone's instructions, made the transfer through channels designed to leave no trail, and waited for confirmation. It came as a single text message. Debt paid. Phone will self-destruct in 10 seconds. Pleasure doing business. The phone sparked, smoked, and died in his hand. Marcus dropped it in the burn barrel outside his quarters and watched it melt into slag. 3 weeks later, he received orders for a private meeting with a colonel from intelligence, whose name didn't appear on any organizational chart Marcus could find. The colonel's office was temporary, borrowed, with no personal effects or identifying markers. Sergeant Webb, I'm going to say something, and you're going to confirm or deny nothing. Understood? Yes, sir. Good. 3 weeks ago, 12 civilians escaped a hostile compound through means that don't align with any known tactical doctrine, weren't captured on any surveillance assets, and involved equipment signatures that match no military unit in theater. Marcus said nothing. Those civilians have been interviewed extensively. They tell fascinating stories about men on motorcycles who spoke no Pashto, wore no identifying patches, and vanished like ghosts. Stories that sound remarkably like fairy tales, which is good, because fairy tales aren't actionable intelligence. Still nothing from Marcus. Here's what I know for certain, Sergeant. You and your team survived an ambush that should have killed all of you. You demonstrated resourcefulness, courage, and a willingness to make decisions under pressure. The kind of decisions that win wars, even if they don't always follow the prescribed playbook. The colonel stood, walked to his borrowed window, looked out at nothing in particular. I also know that sometimes in the field, commanders face impossible choices. Save the mission or save the people. Follow orders or follow conscience. Stay clean or stay alive. He turned back to Marcus. The best commanders, the ones who understand that war is painted in shades of gray rather than black and white, those are the ones who know when rules exist to guide decisions, and when rules exist to be sacrificed for the greater good. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Was this a trap, an admission of guilt, disguised as philosophy? You're being recommended for the Silver Star, Sergeant Webb. Extraordinary heroism in combat, leadership under fire, creative tactical thinking that resulted in mission success and 0 friendly casualties. Congratulations, sir. I didn't do it for a medal. I know. You did it because 12 human beings deserve to go home to their families, and your team deserved to do the same. The fact that you found a way to make both things happen, using whatever resources became available in the moment, that's why you're getting the medal. The colonel pulled a file from his desk drawer. This file contains a number of interesting details about financial transactions, phone records, and contractor movements that, if pursued, would result in multiple courts-martial, international incidents, and a significant amount of paperwork that nobody wants to complete. He fed the file into a shredder beside his desk. This file no longer exists. Neither does this conversation. Neither does whatever decision you may or may not have made in that compound. What does exist is a team of American soldiers who brought everyone home against impossible odds. That's the story. That's the only story. Marcus found his voice. Why, sir? Because 20 years from now, some young sergeant is going to face an impossible choice in a compound somewhere. And the example you set today will inform that decision. Not the rules you broke, not the protocols you violated, but the fundamental understanding that our job is to preserve life, protect the innocent, and bring our people home. Everything else is just paperwork. The colonel extended his hand. Marcus shook it, still processing, dismissed Sergeant and Webb. Off the record, well done. Marcus walked out into the Afghan sun, feeling the weight of the conversation. The medal he'd never wanted. The secrets he'd carry forever. His team was waiting by the motor pool. Torres and Chen and the others, all of them wearing expressions that suggested they knew something had gone down, but wouldn't ask what. "We good, Sergeant?" Chen asked simply. "We're good, Staff Sergeant." "Then let's go check weapons. Got another mission tomorrow. This one promises to be routine." They all laughed, because in their world, routine was the most dangerous promise of all. If you enjoyed this story of impossible choices and brotherhood forged in fire, hit that like button and subscribe for more military stories that blur the line between duty and conscience. Drop a comment about the toughest decision you've ever had to make under pressure. Let's talk about those moments when the right choice and the easy choice were nowhere near each other. That night, alone in his quarters, Marcus wrote a letter he'd never send, addressed to the Ukrainian contractor whose name he didn't know. In it, he tried to explain what those 12 civilians meant, what his team meant, what the cost of compromise looked like when measured against the cost of staying clean. He burned the letter unfinished, letting the words turn to ash and smoke, carrying his gratitude and his guilt up into the night sky, where both could dissipate into the vast indifference of the universe. Because that's what it meant to be a soldier in the gray spaces between right and wrong. You made your choice, you lived with it, you carried your team home, and you never, ever spoke of the price you paid to make it all possible. The mission reports would show a successful operation. The after-action reviews would highlight textbook tactics. The medal ceremonies would celebrate heroism and leadership. But Marcus would always remember the moment he broke every rule to save everyone who mattered, and the strange mercy of a system that chose to look away from how the impossible had become possible. Years later, after Marcus had rotated home, after he'd left the service and tried to build something resembling a normal life, he received a package with no return address. Inside, a single photograph of 12 people at a village celebration, families intact, children grown, life continuing because one sergeant had decided that regulations were less important than humanity. No note, no explanation, just evidence that his choice had ripples he'd never see, consequences that extended far beyond that burning compound, and those desperate minutes when ammunition ran low and options ran out. Marcus kept that photograph in his desk drawer, pulled it out on the hard days when he questioned everything. When the cost of his decisions felt too heavy to carry, he'd look at those faces, those living, breathing people who existed because he'd chosen them over career and protocol, and the comfortable safety of following orders. And he'd remember what the colonel had said, that the best commanders understand when rules guide decisions, and when rules must be sacrificed for the greater good, that sometimes staying clean means letting everyone die, and sometimes getting dirty is the only way everyone lives. It wasn't a perfect answer, it wasn't even a comfortable one, but it was true in a way that regulations and protocols and operating procedures could never capture. The messy, complicated, beautiful truth that saving lives sometimes requires breaking every rule designed to preserve them. That's the story nobody tells at medal ceremonies. That's the reality they don't teach in leadership courses. And that's the burden carried by everyone who's ever had to choose between the mission and the people, between the system and survival, between the comfortable lie of following orders and the terrible weight of making the right choice. Marcus had made his choice, He'd live with it forever. And somewhere in Afghanistan, 12 families lived with it too, every single day, in the simple miracle of being alive. That was enough. It had to be enough, because in the end, the measure of a soldier isn't the medals on their chest or the regulations they followed, but the lives they saved, and the people they brought home, by whatever means necessary, at whatever cost required. And if that makes him a hero or a criminal or something complicated in between, well, Marcus had long since stopped caring about labels. He'd done what needed doing. His team had survived. The civilians had survived. And the rules that died in that compound, they were always going to be casualties of war, sooner or later, in one form or another. The only question that mattered was simple. When the impossible choice comes, when every option is wrong, when staying clean means letting everyone die, what will you choose? The comfortable death of following orders, or the terrible burden of saving everyone who matters? No matter what it costs, Marcus chose, and 12 families exist because of that choice. That's not a military story. That's not even really a war story. That's a human story, told in the language of impossible decisions and unthinkable prices, written in the lives saved and the rules broken, and the weight carried forever by everyone who understands that sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing means becoming everything you swore you'd never be. And living with that contradiction, that's what makes you a soldier worth following into the fire. But there's something else they don't tell you about making impossible choices. Something Marcus discovered 5 years after that night in Kandahar, when he was working as a security consultant and living what most people would call a normal life. He got a call from Torres, now a staff sergeant himself, stationed in Germany and training the next generation of soldiers. "Sergeant Webb, I need to tell you something," Torres said, his voice carrying that same mixture of determination and uncertainty it had held in the compound. "I faced my own impossible choice last week. Different circumstances, same equation, save lives or follow protocol. I couldn't do both." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "What did you do?" "I remembered what you taught me, not with words but with action. I broke the rules. I called in resources I wasn't supposed to have. I made promises I had no authority to make, and everyone came home alive." There was a long pause. Marcus could hear Torres breathing on the other end of the line, could feel the weight of what the younger man was carrying. "They're investigating me," Torres continued, "probably going to end my career. But sir, I wanted you to know that what you did that night, it wasn't just about those 12 civilians or our team. It was about showing the rest of us that leadership means having the courage to be wrong in the eyes of the system, if it means being right in the eyes of your conscience." Marcus closed his eyes, felt the familiar weight settling back onto his shoulders. His choice hadn't ended in that compound. It had echoed forward, creating ripples that touched people he'd never meet, situations he'd never know about, decisions made by soldiers who'd learned that sometimes the rulebook is just another casualty of war. "Torres, listen to me carefully," Marcus said. "You did the right thing, not the easy thing, not the safe thing, but the right thing. And whatever comes next, you face it knowing that somewhere, people are alive because you were brave enough to break. Will they court-martial me, sir? Maybe, probably. But they'll be court-martialing someone who saved lives when the system said to let them die. That's a legacy you can live with." After the call ended, Marcus sat in his office, looking at that photograph of 12 civilians at their village celebration, and he understood something new about the choice he'd made. It wasn't just one decision in one compound on one desperate night. It was a philosophy of leadership, passed from generation to generation, sometimes through official channels, but more often through quiet conversations, And the example of soldiers who'd chosen humanity over procedure when both couldn't be served. The real story of that night wasn't about breaking rules, or hiring contractors, or surviving impossible odds. It was about the moment Marcus decided that regulations existed to serve people, not the other way around, and that when the two came into conflict, the choice was clear, even if the consequences were severe. That's the final truth about leadership in impossible situations. Your choice becomes part of the legacy you leave behind, influences decisions made by people you'll never meet, shapes the moral compass of everyone who learns your story. Marcus broke the rules to save lives, and in doing so, he gave permission to every soldier who came after him to make the same terrible, necessary, beautiful choice when their moment came. And that permission, that legacy of moral courage over procedural compliance, might be the most important thing any leader can pass forward. Not tactics or techniques or operational procedures, but the fundamental understanding that our job is to preserve human life. And everything else, every rule, every regulation, every protocol, is negotiable when lives hang in the balance. That's what makes a soldier worth following. Not the medals, not the by-the-book operations, but the willingness to sacrifice career, reputation, and personal safety to ensure that everyone who matters comes home alive. Marcus made that choice, Torres made that choice, and somewhere right now, another young sergeant is facing that same impossible decision, drawing courage from the knowledge that they're not alone in the gray spaces where duty and conscience collide. And living with that contradiction, that's what makes you a soldier worth following into the fire.